So this was the most frustrating video that I've ever had to make in my 10 years making videos. And I thought it was gonna be a cool, simple, fun, build a minimal gaming PC video, but it ended up turning into me rebuilding this computer 4 times, returning a perfectly good 3060 Founders Edition graphics card, and overall just dragging out into a 3.5-week process to build a gaming PC. So please stick around to the end. Let me know that it turned out okay, because I think it did, but I'd love to hear your opinion. The goal of this video is basically to take my old NZXT H500 build, which I built like 3 years ago, and transform it into something more minimal and modern. I've really been appreciating the minimal, modern, like sleek style, and I've been transforming kind of everything I have, my entire office space, all my peripherals, to that style. So I felt it was time to do that with my PC build. And the PC build is actually really cool because it's gonna be so much smaller, and I'm actually doing a mini ITX form factor build. If you've never done something like that, it's just so much different than doing it in a normal size build because everything is so much smaller, so much more compact, and you actually have to buy separate parts to do it than you would for a normal build. So to do this, I went with this case called the IQUNIX ZX-1. The IQUNIX ZX-1 is a minimal and modern, fully machined aluminum case, and it just looks beautiful in my opinion. Now for the case, besides being cool, it also has a ton of utility. The top of the case is fully vented with these cool blades, and the side panels are also vented. In fact, every surface of this PC is vented except for the front. All of the panels of the ZX-1 attach through magnets, so removing panels or putting them back on is literally as easy as pushing on the panel or pulling it off. There's no screws to lose or parts to misplace. Now, the bottom of the ZX-1 does come off. You can take every panel off this case, but it needs screws to do that. This actually isn't such a big deal because IQUNIX actually includes a really cool, high quality screwdriver to remove the screws from their case. All of the screws in their case are these like hex screws of different sizes, and IQUNIX actually includes a multiple attachment head screwdriver, so you can switch them out and remove any screws you need to with ease. My only critique with this screwdriver is that I actually thought I was missing a part at first because it comes with like 4 slots for the actual screwdriver heads, but they only include 3 screwdriver heads, which is normal. I just thought I was missing a piece because there's room for 4. The front of the ZX-1 features a nice clicky power button with a really cool LED white ring around it and a few inputs for your devices. It has 2 USB-A, 1 USB-C, a headphone jack, and a microphone jack, all for ease of access. Now, for as difficult as this build is, IQUNIX includes a really helpful manual to kind of walk you through each step that you need to take to build this PC in the right order. Now, speaking of building the case, the first thing you have to do is take all the panels off of the ZX-1 and get ready to build. And you have to build in a certain order or you'll end up like me and have to rebuild it a few times over to get everything to fit. Like, literally. There's almost no room to diverge from the build path that they give you. After all the panels are off, it's time to start taking apart the interior of the case. IQUNIX, of course, provides you with all the screwdriver heads to remove the hex screws and essentially remove the AIO platform, since this is the water-cooled version of the case. Now make sure you're setting these screws aside so you don't lose them later when you have to reconstruct the case. Once the screws are all removed, you can remove the entire front input panel and the AIO platform in one piece, which of course I set aside in a safe place for later. Next is the PSU bracket removal, because this case actually has the PSU hang sideways because there's not enough room for it physically to fit in a normal horizontal position. Again, it's super simple and basically just a matter of removing enough screws. The bracket is an L shape, which holds the PSU vertically for installation later. Now to power the PSU, obviously we have to plug in a power cable into the case, and we just sort of leave it dangling right now through a channel in the middle of the case, but we'll tidy all of this up later. This is the point where we can put the case aside because we'll actually be building the core components, the motherboard, outside of the case. For this build, I'm running a mini ITX motherboard, or more specifically the ROG B550i. You don't really have a ton of choices when it comes to mini ITX motherboards, and surprisingly, they actually cost a lot more. This one cost me close to $220, when comparably for the same similar normal ATX version, it's closer to $150. Now, the first step to actually building out the motherboard is installing the NVMe. For my NVMe, I grabbed a 1TB one from Hynix. To install the NVMe, you essentially remove a single screw from a standoff holding the NVMe heatsink in place, remove the heatsink, and make sure you remove any plastic coverings or your temperatures are going to be all over the place. The NVMe basically just slides into place and is secured with a single screw into the standoff. The next step is taking out RAM from my old build and swapping it over to the B550 motherboard. Now, these RAM sticks were a little bit different to install because only one side of the RAM slot actually opens up to accept the stick. The other half looks like it does, but if you push too hard, you'll break it. And once I figured that out, it was really simple to just click in my Corsair Vengeance RGB sticks. And although the RGB, I'm gonna be turning that off anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Now, I also did pick up some cheap thermal paste from Best Buy because my initial plan was to use my Kraken X63 AIO for my existing case and move it over. However, this is where the build started to really go south. I actually spent all the time removing the AIO from my existing build, pulling it out and moving it over to the ZX-1, only to find out I had made a stupid mistake. The ZX-1 only accepts AIO with 120mm fan sizes, and the X63 of course is 140mm fans, so it just physically doesn't fit into the ZX-1. This is like the first step of this build going poorly. So I had to 2-day ship over an X53 from Amazon. It was an expensive mistake, but I was too far into the build at this point to not buy it. The X53 is actually really easy to install. Just make sure you use the right motherboard attachment or your standoffs won't line up. I'm using the AM4 socket bracket, and because this AIO has pre-installed thermal paste, I opted initially to not use my own thermal paste and just leave it be. However, I did end up reinstalling this AIO so many times that I just ended up using my own paste at the end of the day, so kind of just do whatever you want to. An important note, the AIO has to slide into the case before actually installing it. If you install the bracket too early, you literally can't fit the AIO through anymore and you'll have to start over. Reinstalling the bracket is easy though, and it's just a couple screws, and IQUNIX of course is nice enough to tell you which way to point your fans, and for this build, the radiator sits on top of the fans and my fans are pushing air through the radiator and out of the case. For the CPU, again, I'm reusing a component from my old build, which is my Ryzen 5800X. And of course, it's gonna be a little bit dirty, but nothing some paper towel can't fix. After cleaning it, it's time to reinstall the chip, which is actually really easy as long as you're paying close enough attention to the little pyramid symbol. Both the motherboard and chip have a pyramid icon that you have to line up to know what direction the CPU goes. From there, it's just as simple as lifting up the clasp, putting in the CPU, and closing the clasp carefully. So now it's time to install the riser cable onto the motherboard. And if you don't know, a lot of mini ITX cases, you can't actually install the GPU directly onto the motherboard because it doesn't fit. You have to use a riser cable, which basically allows you to extend the distance that you're plugging your GPU into your motherboard from. In our case, we're gonna install the riser cable for now and just kind of leave it hanging until we come back to it later. After popping in the IO shield to the case, it's time for the motherboard install. I slid the riser cable through the top of the case and carefully inserted the motherboard. It was a little tricky to line it up with all the screw holes, and the screw holes themselves were super difficult to get to. Some of them I had to screw at an angle, which obviously isn't the safest, but it worked out fine. I wanted to make sure I had enough power for the graphics card that I'm gonna be putting in this, so I went with the Lian Li 700 watt SFX power supply. It's tiny, but plenty powerful enough for my graphics card, which is gonna be a 3060 Ti. It's also a modular PSU, which I would definitely recommend if you're building a small form factor PC, because you get to pick and choose how many cables you actually want to plug into the PSU, so you're not cluttering up your case when you don't need to. Installing the PSU into the bracket with just a couple of screws is really simple, and from there, the trick is just moving it around until you can line it up with the case mounting holes and screw it in. Overall, pretty simple stuff. Okay, so this is where things get interesting. The graphics card that I initially bought, and the one you'll see in all this footage, is actually a 3060 Founders Edition graphics card that I was just randomly somehow lucky enough to buy straight from Best Buy's website for $399. It sounds crazy, and it took me 2 years to do it, and I was so excited. All of the footage you see with this Founders Edition card is older footage, and I don't actually own this card anymore. This is the part of the video where I need 30 seconds of explanation. Remember I was talking about the riser cable? So riser cables and graphics cards and motherboards all use this connection called PCIe. And there's different versions of PCIe. The problem is that I didn't know. My 3060 Ti is PCIe 4. It's a newer version of PCIe, but my riser cable and my motherboard were auto-detecting at PCIe 3. What this means is that when I was plugging everything in and I closed up the computer, I fully built the ZX-1, it wasn't recognizing my graphics card was actually plugged in. It would boot up and pretty much just immediately shut down. When I went into the settings to see my graphics card temps and things like that, it literally just didn't show them. And when I went to the device manager, it showed it and said error 43. When you look up error 43 on the internet, it basically tells you your card is dead. That's like what everything says. So me being me, I was like, well, this sucks. I'm super frustrated. I just spent 2 weeks trying to build this PC. I'm just gonna return this card and get a different one. So that's what I did. I returned my 3060 Ti Founders Edition and bought a 3060 Ti from Zotac. I go to plug in the Zotac 3060 Ti, and lo and behold, I'm still getting an error 43. We're on 2.5 weeks into the build at this point, and the office is destroyed. My thought process on this PC is a mess. I've Googled, searched everything you could possibly think of, and finally I come across a Reddit thread with like 3 comments where someone mentions that different PCIe versions will cause this to happen. What I did is I basically booted up my PC, set my motherboard to force PCIe 3, and it worked. So after 3 weeks, it turned out that my motherboard was basically forcing PCIe 4 connection. My cable, my riser cable wanted PCIe 3. My graphics card wanted PCIe 4, but could work with 3. So I forced everything down to 3 and it boots. The computer finally turned on after 3 weeks. Now overall, I think that this PC looks amazing. It's the best looking thing. I mean, you can see it right there. It just looks so good and minimal and just out of the way, and it's 1/3 the size of my last PC. I think it is super, super awesome, and I don't think I'm ever gonna switch back to one of those big gamery computers anymore with the glass screen. I'm a fully metal PC case guy now at this point. It looks amazing. IQUNIX, it's so high quality. The magnet panels are just, oh, it's so good. Everything about this case is just perfect, and I think it looks the best out of any small form factor case that I've seen. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments down below. This was one of the longest, most stressful videos I've had to make, so please let me know if you liked it, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.